At a rowdy bar in Denver, Emma Davis sits alone, a cryptic tattoo on her wrist catching unwanted attention. A group of young soldiers mocks it, laughing at what they assume is meaningless ink. But as their taunts grow louder, the energy in the room shifts. Three silent figures rise from the shadows. Navy SEALs, their faces carved with memory. Without a word, they move to stand behind Emma, their presence alone silencing the crowd. The tattoo isn't just a design, it's a code, a memorial from a mission that cost them dearly. And tonight, the truth demands quiet reverence. If this story moved you, support us by subscribing to my channel. Every like, comment, and share helps keep these powerful stories of quiet courage alive. Let's honor the heroes among us, those who carry their sacrifices in silence. Hit that button and stay with us for more unforgettable moments. The young soldier's voice cut through the din of the bar like a jagged edge. Nice tattoo, lady. What is that, your cat's birthday or your Wi-Fi password? He didn't even try to lower his voice, and the table of rowdy buddies around him burst into laughter, their eyes fixed on the small black ink on Emma's wrist. The numbers, 09482, and the fractured diamond gleamed briefly beneath the flickering neon beer sign. It wasn't the kind of tattoo that begged to be noticed, but it carried a certain gravity, like a relic pulled from a battlefield. Emma didn't react, not with the kind of sharp retort they were probably hoping for. She didn't flinch, didn't roll her eyes, or even sigh. Calmly, she set her glass down, her fingers steady, and let her hand rest openly on the table. The tattoo caught the low light again, a silent answer to their mockery. Her eyes met theirs, steady, unbothered. There was no venom, no sharp edge in her gaze, just something quiet, resilient, a strength that didn't need to announce itself. Then silence. It came like a switch flipped in the heart of the bar, cutting off the noise mid-roar. From the shadows in the corner, three figures rose. Navy SEALs, the kind of men who didn't need introductions or ranks stitched on their chests to be known. They didn't speak, they didn't need to. They moved like a unit, practiced and purposeful, stepping into the space between Emma and the soldiers who had laughed. Their presence changed the room instantly. It wasn't confrontation, it was gravity, it was memory, it was respect. No one moved, no one dared say another word. In that thick, waiting silence, the message was clear. Honor doesn't always wear a uniform, and sacrifice doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just sits quietly at the back of the room. The Iron Horse pub wasn't just a watering hole. It breathed like a living thing, soaked in bourbon, cigarette smoke, and the weight of too many untold stories. On this Friday night, it felt like it might burst from the pressure of it all. The crowd was younger than usual. Newly returned troops, high on adrenaline, low on sleep, spilling over with the wild, jittery energy that comes from surviving what most won't understand. They packed every inch of the room, bodies pressed close, laughter loud, movements restless. It wasn't joy, exactly. It was something messier, relief maybe, defiance, the echo of danger still fresh on their skin. The music throbbed from a dusty jukebox near the corner, guitar riffs ricocheting off brick walls smeared with sweat in history. The scent of whiskey clung to the floor, mixed with the burn of sweat and stale smoke. Boots scraped wood. Laughter rang out too loud. Chairs were bumped, stories half yelled over the chaos. Men held onto their drinks like lifelines, their hands clenched tight, knuckles pale. They leaned into the noise because it was better than silence. And in the middle of it all, almost unseen, sat Emma Davis. Her table near the back wasn't hidden, but it felt removed somehow, like the shadows bent slightly around her. She wasn't trying to disappear, but neither was she interested in being seen. Her shoulders curled subtly inward, not from shyness, but from burden. She carried something heavy and silent, the kind of weight that couldn't be shrugged off or shared. Her auburn hair, damp with heat, clung to her temple. The light caught the strands when she shifted, revealing the faint sheen of sweat that came not from nerves, but from the crowded warmth of bodies and beer. Her face was composed, blank even, but her eyes betrayed her. They held years, not just the passing of time, but the kind of years that wear a soul thin, the kind of nights where you wait, breath held, watching for threats that never come, only to find newer ones rising behind them. She'd seen too much, and she'd said far too little. Her eyes weren't searching anymore. They were watching, quiet, cautious. She cradled a half-full pint between her fingers. The beer had gone warm, the foam long faded into delicate streaks down the side. Forgotten, like something once needed and now unnecessary. But that wasn't what drew the soldier's attention. Not really. It was the ink. Bold black numbers, 09482, carved onto the pale skin of her wrist like coordinates to another life. Beside them a diamond, its perfect symmetry cracked into sharp angles, as though something immense had struck it mid-heart and left the wound behind. It wasn't decorative. It wasn't meant for fashion. It looked like a message, a marker, something sacred, something coded for those who could read between the lines. The laughter had missed the point entirely, because that tattoo wasn't a joke. It was a testament. The numbers were part of a story that wasn't told, only carried. The diamond, fractured, not broken, was a symbol of resilience, not fragility. To those who didn't know, it was meaningless. To those who did, it spoke volumes. Balny Emma hadn't come to be seen, but in that moment, under the neon lights, behind the unwavering line of seals, she was seen. And no one laughed again. She sat still, as if daylight itself might rob her of something sacred. They didn't really see Emma, not truly, not yet. Not the way those simple markings on her wrist would eventually force them to. She brought the glass to her lips, took a slow sip, then placed it back on the table with a kind of finality that didn't beg for attention, but commanded it nonetheless. Her fingers came to rest near the faint glow of a low-hung bar lamp, and the tattoo etched into her wrist caught the light just right. That glimmer, subtle and unspoken, shifted something in the air, like the first breath before a deep silence, the kind that settles only when understanding begins to form. It started, as these things usually do, with one voice, loud, arrogant, sharp enough to slice through the casual noise of a bar. A soldier young, maybe 21 at most, leaned over his table with the careless ease of someone who hadn't learned yet that not every question is harmless. His uniform shirt was half untucked, his cheeks flushed with beer, and his confidence fed by the warm buzz of camaraderie. His gaze zeroed in on Emma's wrist with the squint of someone mistaking mystery for a challenge. "Hey, nice tattoo, lady. What is that? Your Wi-Fi password? Or maybe your dog's birthday?" His words sliced through the haze of cigarette smoke and the Iron Horse's grungy atmosphere like a bottle thrown at a wall. Laughter erupted from his buddies. One guy snorted beer through his nose and slapped the sticky tabletop, the empty pint glasses jumping slightly with the force. "Nah, dude," another one chimed in, eyes gleaming with mischief. "Looks more like the combo to her high school locker." The first soldier wasn't finished. Bolstered by their reaction, he rose halfway out of his seat, pointing a finger toward Emma's wrist. His voice got louder, trying to rise above the goiters on the speakers and the ambient crash of glass and murmurs. "Come on, seriously. 43 to known B908 and a busted diamond? Looks like something you'd find printed on a plastic keychain at some sketchy gas station." The room laughed with him, or at least enough of it to make the sound feel heavier than it should have. Their mockery blended into the soundtrack of the bar, riffs of rock music, clinking bottles, the low murmur of tired conversations. But unlike the music, this laughter had a cruel edge to it. It wasn't the kind of sound that invited people in. It was the kind that made you feel small, like maybe you'd been left out on purpose. Emma didn't flinch. Not when the first joke landed, not when the second followed right behind. She didn't tug her sleeve down or pull her hand back. She didn't shift in her seat or shrink into herself the way many might have. She sat completely still, as if all that noise hadn't even touched her. Her hand stayed where it was, palm resting lightly against the wood. The strange set of numbers, 4321 B908, and the fractured diamond visible beneath the low amber light. And in that stillness, her presence grew louder than all their jokes. There was something unshakable in the set of her jaw, something steady and sure in her posture. The tattoo no longer looked small or strange. It looked deliberate, brave, powerful, as if it dared them to keep laughing, keep guessing, until they finally understood what it meant. But they didn't, not yet. Others in the bar had begun to notice, not the tattoo itself, but the tone of what was happening. Mockery has a way of carrying. A few patrons glanced up from their drinks, curiosity flickering in their eyes. Some smirked, amused by the spectacle. Others looked away, not out of indifference, but out of discomfort, unwilling to be part of whatever was unfolding. And in one of the darker corners, where the lights didn't quite reach, three men exchanged glances, brief but meaningful, quiet, wary, as if they recognized the numbers, as if they already knew. It's strange, isn't it? How quickly people judge what they don't understand. How reflexively we laugh at the unfamiliar, as if humor might protect us from the discomfort of not knowing, as if turning mystery into a punchline somehow gives us control. Maybe it's instinct, that need to explain away what doesn't immediately make sense, to reduce it to something small enough not to matter. The numbers, the broken diamond, they didn't fit into the young men's world of war stories shaped by video games, action movies, and barracks bravado. And so they tried to shrink it, dismiss it, mock it, because if they could laugh at it, they didn't have to confront it. If they could make it a joke, then they didn't have to feel the weight it might carry. What they didn't know, what they couldn't know, at least not yet, was that 4321 B908 wasn't a random string of nonsense. It wasn't some throwaway detail. It wasn't meaningless. That mark carried weight. It held a story, one that didn't need to explain itself to strangers. One written in a language only the weary could recognize. The kind of symbol that speaks not in words but in echoes. The kind of thing you feel in your bones before you ever understand it with your mind. But ignorance is a cunning trap. It convinces us that depth doesn't matter if we can't recognize it. It tells us that meaning is only real if it's familiar. So we measure what we see by how easily we can dismiss it, not how deeply we might one day feel it. In that moment, those soldiers weren't just laughing at a tattoo. They were showing the world exactly how little they understood. Worn. The laughter at the bar died down faster than it had risen. The joke had landed wrong, and everyone felt it, even if no one wanted to say it out loud. Emma didn't flinch, didn't retreat. She just sat there, her fingers loosely wrapped around her glass, eyes lifted, steady and composed. No fire, no tears, just calm. But there was something behind that calm, something deeper, like the stillness before a storm rolls in, heavy and inevitable. That one guy, maybe he was just trying to impress his buddies, or maybe he truly didn't know better, grinned through his final jab. Don't tell me it's the code to your luggage lock. Gotta keep those secrets safe, huh? The others laughed, though this time it was scattered, less certain. It echoed against the wooden rafters and brick walls, thin and brittle. Some people exchanged glances, uneasy now. You could feel the shift in the air, subtle but undeniable. The kind of silence that swells when the line's been crossed and everyone knows it but doesn't want to be the first to admit it. Emma's eyes found them one by one, holding each gaze. Not with defiance, not with humiliation. Her look was still, cool, and oddly powerful, like she saw right through the laughter, right through the cheap mockery, and into whatever fear or ignorance drove it. And just like that, the mood shifted. Something had changed. And in the dimmest corner of the Iron Horse pub, beneath flickering neon that cast more shadow than light, three figures stirred. They hadn't come to intervene. Not at first. Commander Jack Reynolds sat unmoving, the battered wood of the table pressed against his forearms, one hand loosely curled around a bottle of beer he hadn't sipped in a while. His face, carved by sun, wind, and time, was half turned toward the scene at the bar. His steel-gray eyes had narrowed. Not at the man laughing, but at the tattoo on Emma's wrist, ink so black it seemed to drink the light. 43. T1B9 Hus, the numbers wrapped around the fractured diamond design like barbed wire. Beside him, Lieutenant Sarah Ortega had gone still. Small-framed, razor-sharp, and fast, with a thin white scar tracing her jaw, she followed Jack's gaze. Her breath hitched, just slightly. But in the hush that had settled over their table, it sounded loud. She knew that tattoo. She remembered those numbers. And just like that, the years peeled away. Tom Briggs, the silent rock of the team, leaned forward slowly, the old wood chair groaning under his weight. He caught sight of the tattoo, then looked to Jack, then Sarah. He didn't need words. None of them did. Their expressions told him all he needed to know. Operation Black Dagger. Just the name alone was enough to choke a room with memory. It wasn't the kind of operation anyone ever mentioned over drinks. Not even during those hard-earned reunions when war stories flowed with whiskey. It was locked behind clearance codes, buried under silence, and still it lived inside them, raw and real. 4321B908. That number wasn't just a string of digits. It had been whispered in headsets over the roar of helicopter blades. It had flashed on mission briefings, scrawled in black across classified pages. That number meant one night. The night. The night they infiltrated an enemy stronghold hidden deep in the mountains to pull out hostages before the whole place collapsed in fire and chaos. The night they lost people. Brothers, sisters, friends. The night the unbreakable fractured. They'd called themselves the Diamond Team. Tough, solid, indestructible. Until they weren't it. The fractured diamond wasn't just art. It wasn't meant to be noticed, or commented on, or ridiculed. It was memory, pain etched in skin, a tribute to the fallen, and a reminder to the living that not all scars bleed. Emma didn't move, but her tattoo told a story these three recognized instantly. She wasn't a joke. She was one of them. Jack's jaw locked tight, and his fingers curled around the neck of the bottle with such force that the glass groaned under the pressure. He had to remind himself to breathe, deep, slow, and steady, but he couldn't pull his eyes away from Emma's wrist. That tattoo wasn't just a cryptic string of ink or some decorative emblem. It was a marker, a silent vow engraved on skin, a tribute to the fallen, a symbol of something shared and sacred. A memory kept alive. Beside him, Sarah's eyes shimmered, not from tears but from a memory so raw it tightened her throat. She pressed her lips into a thin line, forcing down the swell of emotion that surged up uninvited. It brought with it the sharp snap of gunfire echoing across the frigid peaks, the deafening churn of a Blackhawk's blades slicing through wind and snow, the night cries that came when plans unraveled and people bled. Tom sat silently, his broad hands stretched wide over the tabletop, as if grounding himself against a tide of ghosts that threatened to drag them all back into the past. The quiet around them thickened until Tom finally spoke, his voice gravelly, nearly lost in the low din of the pub. Black Dagger. That was it, just 2 words, but they carried the weight of a dozen missions and 1,000 memories. Jack gave a firm nod. Yeah. Sarah exhaled slowly and her gaze drifted back to the present, to Emma, who sat still and composed amid the cheap laughter and careless jabs, enduring them with a kind of poise that didn't flinch or falter. She was there, Sarah whispered, her voice as soft as ashes scattered on wind. She's one of us. Jack nodded again, not just in agreement, but in recognition, not of rank or protocol, but of something deeper. Brotherhood, duty, the unspoken bond that connected those who had stood shoulder to shoulder through hell and lived to carry the stories inked into flesh and spirit. It wasn't a question of whether they would act. It was already decided. Not through words, but through memory, through loyalty, through a shared understanding that demanded action. They would not let this farce continue. Not here, not tonight, not with one of their own being ridiculed. The laughter inside the Iron Horse pub began to lose its shape. It didn't stop entirely, but the edges started to fray. There was a ripple of unease in the air, like the subtle tension before a storm. Even those who laughed the loudest began to glance around, unsure. Sure, and now, sensing something shifting beneath their feet. Emma remained exactly where she was. She hadn't moved a muscle, hadn't said a word. Her pint glass sat untouched, its condensation pooling slowly into a ring on the worn table. Her hand lay still, palm pressed to the wood, wrist angled just enough to catch the soft flicker of the neon sign overhead. The tattoo, code and cracked diamond, gleamed faintly, silent and bold. She lifted her gaze slowly, deliberately, locking eyes with each of them in turn. The one who'd cracked the joke about the Wi-Fi password faltered first. His smirk trembled at the edges. Then came the guy who tossed out the locker combo line. He blinked fast, swallowing whatever smart remark had been forming. And finally, the one who thought he'd be clever with the luggage lock quip. He stared down at his glass, suddenly fascinated by it, avoiding her eyes like they burned. But Emma's eyes weren't angry. There was no fire, no rage that could be dismissed as overreaction, no verbal retaliation to give them something to push back against. What lived in her gaze was far more unsettling, a silence too resolute to ignore, a calm that didn't seek to explain or justify, a steadiness forged from surviving things these boys couldn't even imagine. And then they stood. From the corner, Commander Jack Reynolds rose first. His chair scraped against the floor with a soft final note, not loud but enough to snap the brittle mask of easy cheer that still lingered in the bar. He stood tall, every inch the man who had once led in places where laughter had no place. He needed no uniform to remind anyone of who he was. Lieutenant Sarah Ortega followed, rising with a grace that was precise and unshakable. She didn't glare or threaten. She simply looked, and in that look was a clarity that turned the air cold between her and those who had mocked. Chief Petty Officer Tom Briggs was the last to rise. He didn't rush. He moved with intent, with gravity. When he stood, he seemed to fill the space, like a wall had suddenly grown in the room. None of them spoke. They didn't need to. Together, the three of them stepped forward, out of the shadows of their corner, moving toward the center of the room where Emma sat. The atmosphere shifted around them with every step, the tension coiling tighter. It wasn't aggression, it wasn't theater. It was a march of purpose, each footfall saying, "Enough." The young soldiers froze, caught mid-joke, mid-drink, mid-sneer. Their words turned brittle and faded in their mouths. Even their smirks couldn't survive the weight that had entered the room. The air had changed, thicker now, and suddenly they understood. This wasn't about a tattoo. It never was. Their expressions froze. Confusion flickered in their eyes. Who were these men? What was going on? What had changed in the room so quickly, so silently? The SEALs didn't speak a word, didn't raise a hand. They came to a stop just behind Emma's table, close enough to be unmistakably aligned with her, but not close enough to interfere. They didn't need to. Their stance, their stillness, was enough. A silent phalanx, a human wall made not of threats, but of presence, an unspoken force stronger than any command. The bar fell utterly quiet. Conversation died mid-sentence. Laughter dissolved in the air. Even the rock music playing from the jukebox dimmed, like the speakers themselves hesitated, sensing the shift. The entire building seemed to exhale and then hold its breath. No clink of glass, no scraping chairs, no footsteps, just silence, thick, suspended silence. Every eye turned, drawn irresistibly toward the quiet confrontation now unfolding. Emma didn't glance back at the men behind her. She didn't need to. She knew who they were, what they were. She felt them not just in the space they occupied, but in the gravity they carried. That silent unity built not on parties or training drills, but in the crucible of pain, of shared fear, of missions that left scars too deep for words. Her back straightened slightly. Her chin lifted just enough to be noticed by those who knew what it meant. It wasn't a signal. It was gratitude, wordless and deep. She didn't need them there, but they had come anyway. And the young soldiers? They understood now. In the silence, in that pause between breath and word, they saw it. The code they mocked, the tattoo they'd laughed at, the silence they misread. All of it meant something, and none of it was theirs to ridicule. They hadn't earned that right. No one told them to shut up. No one needed to. Shame is a quiet teacher, but when it speaks, it reaches deep. The loudest of the group swallowed hard, his throat shifting in a nervous gulp. Another stared down, suddenly fixated on the wet ring his glass had left on the tabletop. Not a word was said, not a single rebuke needed to be voiced. Because real honor doesn't announce itself. It doesn't demand attention. It stands firm, unshakable in moments like this. Moments when the air itself waits to see who'll rise and who'll falter. The SEALs didn't stand with Emma because she was weak. Anyone with sense could see she wasn't. She could have weathered the storm alone. No, they stood because, honor insisted on it. Because sometimes the strongest answer is presence. Not noise, not confrontation, just being there, just standing. Because respect, the kind that holds weight, doesn't come wrapped in fanfare. It comes in choices, in stillness, in showing up when no one told you to. And that night in the Iron Horse pub, a rare thing unfolded, a lesson given without a single syllable spoken, a truth made visible, a moment in which cruelty and mockery collapsed beneath the weight of something much stronger, understanding. And in that moment of revelation, the brashness faded, the laughter turned hollow, the voices dulled, and none of them would ever forget what they had witnessed. Not the girl, not the men, not the crowd, not the night. The tension stretched thinner than breath, as if the wrong word could shatter it all. No one dared move. Even the jukebox seemed subdued now, its melody drifting in the background like an echo from another world. The stillness wasn't empty. It was loaded, brimming with meaning too large for speech. Jack Reynolds stepped forward. One slow step, solid, grounded, a man who never chased attention, but whose presence demanded it all the same. When he spoke, it was not loud, but it landed with the weight of stone hitting still water. 4321B908, he said, his voice steady, his gaze locked on the tattoo on Emma's wrist. That's not a password, kid. That's Black Dagger. A subtle but sharp shift passed over the young men's faces. The name landed, and the effect was immediate. The cocky mask they'd worn so confidently now cracked, revealing unease in the slow, dawning sting of regret. None of them said anything, but the way they shifted in their seats, the way their eyes darted and avoided, said enough. Jack still didn't look at them. Not yet. His focus remained fixed on that tattoo. That jagged black ink, fractured diamond lines cutting across her skin. A symbol of something deeper than ink could ever explain. Tora Bora, he added, quieter now, more to himself than to anyone else. The name hung in the air, heavy, sacred. That place, that mission, where nothing went right, where everything fell apart, where lives were lost and shadows lingered. The fractured diamond on Emma's wrist shimmered faintly in the bar's dim light. Broken lines etched into skin, carved with memory, pain, and survival. A memorial drawn in silence. A name, a place, a loss that needed no embellishment. Behind Jack, Tom Briggs nodded once, slow, deliberate. Sarah Ortega's eyes welled, the sheen of tears not yet fallen. Her gaze turned inward, to ghosts only she could see. Echoes of voices, faces frozen in time, and then finally Jack turned toward the young men, not with anger, not with wrath, but with something far more piercing. The quiet gravity in Jack's voice wasn't something learned. It was carved from loss, the kind that etched deep lines into a soul. He had buried too many brothers, and he carried that weight with him wherever he went. Black Dagger wasn't some mission in the headlines or whispered in war rooms. No, it was the one nobody wanted to talk about, the kind that lived in the silence between breaths, in the tightness of a mashishen, in the flicker of pain behind a glance. The kind of story that didn't want remembering, but refused to be forgotten by anyone who'd lived it. Emma sat quietly as Jack spoke, her wrist resting lightly on the bar, the tattoo now catching the young men's eyes for the first time. Not just the ink, but what it meant. Their earlier bravado drained from their faces under the tired neon, replaced by an uneasy pallor. The loud one, the first to mock, the one with the jokes about Wi-Fi passwords, couldn't meet her eyes anymore. His gaze dropped to the worn table, his cheeks blotched with shame that burned deeper than he had expected. Jack's voice didn't rise, didn't push. He wasn't speaking to belittle them. He was giving the story the breath it was owed. We went into Tora Bora, he said steady and low, to pull hostages out, civilians, contractors, people who would have died if we hadn't reached them. And to get them out, we had to fight through hell. And hell followed us all the way down those goddamn mountains. His jaw tightened, his voice pressing through the memory. Ambushes, traps, weather that turned brutal in a heartbeat. We lost a team that night. We lost brothers. We lost the code. His words hung in the air like smoke. That was our rally point, our final call sign. That diamond, It wasn't just a symbol, it was our team. Solid, unbreakable. He paused, eyes far away. Until it wasn't. Then he said no more. He didn't need to. The room held the silence for him. Emma never said a word. She didn't have to. She never wore that mark for admiration, never told its story for sympathy. She wore it because it meant something. Because some stories should be carried where only the ones who understand will recognize them. That diamond wasn't meant for strangers. It was for those who knew what it meant. Now the young soldiers understood. The one who'd mocked her swallowed hard, his throat too tight to speak, fingers nervously working the rim of his glass as if he could smooth away the shame that settled over him. Another kept his eyes on the floor, jaw clenched, blinking fast against the burn in his eyes. The third shifted uncomfortably. The smirk that had once curved his mouth gone, replaced by the realization that he'd made a joke out of something sacred. Sarah and Tom stood behind Jack, unmoved. They didn't need to speak. Their stance said enough, solid, unwavering, like the very mountain where they'd once fought and where they'd left pieces of themselves. They didn't flinch beneath the weight of what had been revealed or the young soldier's regret. They simply stood, and in that stillness, they reminded everyone that respect wasn't a word tossed around in bars. It was earned, lived, remembered. Jack's voice softened, not with weakness, but with understanding. Respect isn't about who yells loudest when the music's up, he said. It's about who stood when it counted and who never forgets the ones who can't stand next to us anymore. He turned to Emma, offering her a small, solemn nod. No fanfare, no added words, just a quiet gesture from one warrior to another. The young men remained seated in the stillness that followed, humbled. They were learning right then and there how little they'd understood. That some marks on skin weren't about style or rebellion, but written in sacrifice, in blood, in the kind of pain that leaves ghosts behind. The quiet wrapped around them like fog, dense, inescapable. No one dared speak. Under the dim lighting of the old iron horse, with its flickering neon and faded wooden grooves, the soldiers sat changed. Their earlier swagger had drained away, leaving something more human in its place, remorse, awareness, and the beginning of respect. Emma didn't offer them a speech. She didn't need to. Her silence had carried more weight than any words could have. She stood slowly. The scrape of her chair's legs was soft but deliberate, cutting through the silence like a whisper. She reached for her jacket, slung it over her arm, and rested her hand for a beat on the table. Just a light touch, a final goodbye to a moment that had shifted something in the air. The bar, once loud and careless with laughter, stayed hushed, like even the walls were listening, holding the breath of the story just shared. Her boots tapped gently against the floor as she walked, quiet, confident, strength in motion, the kind that didn't need an audience, didn't crave recognition. The SEALs watched her go. Jack, Sarah, Tom. None of them moved. None of them tried to add to what had already been said without being said. But as she passed each of them, they offered her the same nod Jack had given. Not a salute, not a show, just that quiet recognition passed from one fighter to another. We see you. We remember with you. Emma didn't look back. She didn't have to. The door swung open behind her, letting in the night's cool breath. And with it came the low hum of the city, far away from Bora, but never far enough to forget. The scent of wet pavement still lingered in the air, mingled with the faint, greasy breath of diesel from a passing bus. Somewhere off in the distance, the low wail of a siren cut through the night, faint, almost melodic, like the lullaby of a city that never truly sleeps. And then, just like that, she was gone, swallowed whole by the night, vanishing into its embrace without a backward glance. All she left behind was the quiet, resolute echo of her defiance, a final, unspoken truth etched into the memories of everyone who had witnessed what unfolded. The young men stayed seated, no longer laughing, no longer smirking. Something in them had shifted, though none of them could yet name it. It wasn't immediate clarity or sudden wisdom. It was more like the first sting of shame, quiet, unexpected, and deeply unsettling. The mocking words they had tossed around so carelessly earlier now clung to them like a stain, one not easily wiped away. And yet, in that stain, there was a lesson, sharp and unforgettable, carved into their conscience. One by one, their heads slowly lifted. Their eyes found the figures who had remained still throughout. The seals, veterans, guardians, living testaments to sacrifice and strength, who had stood in silent defense not with anger, but with gravity. Their presence said everything, and in the brief exchange of glance that followed, something passed between the young men and those silent sentries. There was no need for an apology to be spoken. Understanding didn't demand words. Respect, born too late, bloomed in its place. But it was real, the seals never spoke. They didn't need to. Their silence carried weight, a presence more powerful than any speech. They were a reminder that true honor doesn't seek attention. It doesn't parade itself, doesn't taunt or posture. It simply exists, quiet and unshakable. Eventually, the Iron Horse pub eased back into its usual rhythm. The jukebox resumed its song, a lazy tune humming through the air. Glasses clinked. Low conversations resumed. But beneath it all, something had changed. It was as though the air itself held the imprint of what had just transpired. A memory not carved into the walls, but into the people who had been there to see it, into the hearts of those who, only moments earlier, had thought they understood the world and their place in it. That night, those young soldiers came face to face with a truth that often gets buried in the noise of everyday life, a truth too easily forgotten. The power of a symbol doesn't lie in how bold it appears or how clever we think we are when we notice it. Its weight comes from the story it carries. And in moments of ignorance, we're so quick to dismiss what we don't understand, to fill uncomfortable silence with mockery instead of taking the time to see more clearly. Emma's tattoo was never a decoration. It wasn't there to invite comment or demand recognition. It was a memorial, a vow inked into flesh, a wound made visible, a silent tribute to something she'd survived, someone she had lost, or a promise she had made to never forget. And what those young men realized, and what all of us would do well to remember, is that what's on the surface is rarely the whole story. The quietest people often carry the heaviest truths. The smallest marks can represent the deepest pain. So next time we come across a symbol we don't recognize, a tattoo, a patch on a jacket, a distant look in someone's eye, maybe we pause. Maybe we don't rush to joke or judge. Maybe we take a breath. We look a little closer. We respect the story, even if we don't yet know what it is. Because this was never just about a tattoo or a tense night in a bar. It was about something much bigger. It was about the way we choose to see one another in a world that spins faster with each passing day. It's about the people like Emma who still walk among us in grocery store aisles, at Sunday church services, in hospital waiting rooms, or standing quietly at the edge of a small-town parade. People who carry stories on their backs, pain in their hearts, and memories that no casual conversation can hold. How often do we overlook them? How often do we fail to recognize those who once stood where it mattered most? Those who gave, who suffered, who endured? And how often do we let our assumptions speak before we even try to understand? This story asks us to slow down, to listen with more than our ears, to see with more than our eyes, to reach first for kindness instead of cruelty, because real courage doesn't always wear a uniform, and duty doesn't vanish the moment that uniform is folded away. Let this memory settle in, let it stretch its roots inside you, and next time may we all choose the path of empathy before judgment, because sometimes the truest heroes are the ones who never speak their pain aloud, the ones who simply carry it with quiet grace, day after day.